In 1862, a Union private cracked open his hardtack and found it crawling with worms. He did not throw it away. He dunked it in his coffee, skimmed the bugs off the top, and ate every last crumb. That was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For 4 years, over 3 million soldiers survived on rations, so brutal a modern nutritionist would call it a slow death sentence. Number 14 was so disgusting that soldiers gave it a nickname still used today. And number 3, during the siege of Vicksburg, men paid 2 weeks' wages for something you would set a trap for in your basement. Here is what nobody tells you about the Civil War. More soldiers died from what they ate than from enemy bullets. Disease killed over 400,000 men, and most of it started with what went into their stomachs. Hit that subscribe button, because what these men choked down will change how you think about every meal you have ever complained about. Let us count down the 25 most brutal meals Civil War soldiers actually ate to survive. Number 25th, plain hardtack eaten dry. Before anything else on this list, you need to understand the food that defined the entire war. Hardtack was a 3-inch square cracker made from nothing but flour and water, baked until every drop of moisture was gone. The Union Army shipped millions of them from factories in the North. By the time they reached soldiers in the field, they were months old, sometimes years old. Camp gossip said that some had been left over from the Mexican-American War more than a decade earlier. Soldiers called them tooth dullers, sheet iron crackers, and worm castles. You could not bite through one without risking a tooth. Men smashed them with rocks or cracked them against their rifle butts just to break off a piece small enough to chew. One New York soldier wrote home after a meal of hardtack, saying his teeth had become easier and he would make another stab at writing. A cracker so hard it doubled as a weapon and a punchline. Number 24, hardtack soaked in coffee. Since plain hardtack could loosen teeth, the most common trick was to drop pieces into a tin cup of scalding coffee and let them soften. This served 2 purposes. The hot liquid made the cracker edible, and the weevils that had burrowed inside floated to the surface where a man could skim them off before drinking. Soldiers learned to do this in the dark on purpose. If you could not see what was floating in your cup, you could pretend it was not there. The coffee itself was no luxury. Union troops received green beans they had to roast in a skillet, crush with a rifle butt, and boil in a tin cup. The result was thick, bitter, and gritty, but soldiers craved it like nothing else. One Union man wrote that without coffee, life was misery indeed. That scalding black brew was the only comfort in a world of mud, disease, and gunfire. Number 23, skilly-gally. When soldiers wanted to make hardtack almost tolerable, they invented skilly-gally. Break the hardtack into pieces, soak it in water until soft, then fry the soggy mess in pork fat until the edges browned and crisped. Some men added a pinch of salt, others stirred in brown sugar, or a drizzle of molasses if they had any. The result was a greasy, crunchy, slightly sweet fried cracker that one reenactor compared to the crispy bits you find at the bottom of a bag of French fries. It was not good, but it was better than gnawing on a raw slab of flour and water. Skilly-gally became so common in Union camps that it appeared in military cookbooks distributed to company cooks. The name itself became slang for anything improvised and barely edible. A private from the 2nd Vermont Volunteers described warming over meat in a pan and frying crackers in the leftover fat as one of many attempts to modify the flavor of plain fare. That was the genius of the Civil War soldier. You hand a man flour, water, and pig grease, and he will build a recipe. Number 22, salt pork eaten raw. Salt pork was the most common meat ration on both sides of the war. It resembled uncut bacon, preserved in so much salt that soldiers had to scrape the crystals off and soak it in water before they could even think about eating it. The leftover salt was saved to season other rations later. On a good day, a man fried his salt pork over a fire. On a march, when there was no time to stop and cook, soldiers sliced it thin and ate it raw between two pieces of hardtack. Cold, salty, and greasy, the combination sat in the stomach like a stone. The fat congealed on the tongue. The salt burned the throat. A New Jersey infantryman recalled that after a new issue of Bad Meat, every man who had eaten any of the stuff was laid up, and between the heaving and the backdoor trots, they had a sorry time of it. Chronic diarrhea was the most common illness of the entire war, and salt pork was one of its chief architects. Men ate it anyway because hunger was worse than sickness, and salt pork was often all there was. Number 21. Desiccated vegetables. The Union Army tried to solve the scurvy problem by issuing small compressed cubes of dried carrots, onions, and celery. These dense little pucks were supposed to be boiled in water to create a nutritious vegetable soup. In theory, brilliant. In practice, a disaster. The cubes swelled into a stringy, foul-tasting mush that soldiers compared to boiled hay. Within weeks of the first distribution, the troops had renamed them desecrated vegetables. The taste was so bad that many men refused to eat them at all, choosing hunger over the slimy, bitter broth. Yet the Army kept shipping them because they were lightweight, portable, and did not spoil. A soldier could carry a week's worth of vegetables in his coat pocket. The fact that he would rather starve than eat them was beside the point. The irony is that those compressed pucks were one of the few sources of vitamins available. The men who refused them were the same men who developed scurvy, lost teeth, and watched their gums bleed into their coffee. Number 20. Confederate cornbread. While Union soldiers cursed their hardtack, Confederate troops had their own daily misery in the form of cornbread. Cornmeal was the backbone of the Southern diet because corn grew locally and did not require the shipping networks that wheat flour demanded. The problem was that battlefield cornbread bore no resemblance to the golden buttery squares your grandmother made. Soldiers mixed coarse, unsifted cornmeal with water and a pinch of salt. No eggs, no milk, no butter. They shaped the paste into flat cakes and cooked them on a rock or directly in hot ashes. The result was gritty, dry, and tasteless. One soldier from the Stonewall Brigade reported that the cornbread got so hard and moldy that when they broke it, it looked like it had cobwebs in it. That was not an exaggeration. That was Tuesday supper. Number 19. Slapjacks. When Confederate soldiers had a skillet and a few minutes, they made slapjacks. Pour a thick batter of cornmeal and water into bacon grease in a hot pan. Let the bottom brown, then flip it. That was the whole recipe. A Texan swore the finished product would kill a horse to digest. The slapjacks were heavy and dense, alternating between layers of paste and soot, depending on how close the pan sat to the coals. They were filling, and when meat was scarce, a couple of thick slapjacks fried in leftover grease could carry a man through an afternoon of marching. The name came from the sound and the motion. Slap the batter in, jack it out. Quick, crude, and effective. That was Confederate field cooking in 3 words. Number 18. Koosh. On the march, when the Confederate Army had no time for proper meals, soldiers made koosh. They fried bacon in a skillet, added water and cornmeal, and stirred the mess until it thickened into a dense, porridge-like paste. Some men crumbled hardtack captured from Union forces into the mixture for extra body. Koosh could be made in minutes, eaten from the pan, and the skillet wiped clean with a rag before the column moved on. One rebel soldier recalled that koosh was the standard meal during rapid movements, prepared when there was barely time to start a fire, let alone cook a proper supper. It was bland, gluey, and looked like wet cement. But it stuck to the ribs, and in the Confederate Army, That was the highest compliment food could earn. Number 17. Bayonet bread. When flour was available but ovens were not, soldiers got inventive. A drummer boy described wrapping raw dough made of flour and water around the blade of his bayonet and holding it over the campfire until the outside charred and the inside cooked through, more or less. The result was a crusty, smoky tube of half-baked bread that tasted like campfire and ambition. Other men wrapped dough around sticks or ramrods. Some laid flat cakes directly on hot coals, brushing off the ash before eating. These were experiments conducted by desperate young men figuring out how to feed themselves for the first time in their lives. And the bayonet was the most readily available cooking utensil in the Union Army. First pattern break. Here is where the war gets personal. The official Union ration called for about a pound of meat and a pound of bread per soldier per day. On paper, that sounds almost reasonable, but most of these men had never cooked a meal in their lives. In 1860s America, cooking was women's work. When 3 million men suddenly had to feed themselves over open fires, the results were catastrophic. Men burned meat to charcoal, ate raw flour, and boiled coffee in the same pan they used as a wash basin. One Union soldier admitted that the mess pans were used to fry pork and also as a wash basin. The Army eventually appointed company cooks, but even they were just soldiers pulled from the ranks. A cook instructor named James Sanderson was sent to train troops in the field. His motto was telling. Better wear out your pans with scouring than your stomachs with purging. The biggest killer in the Civil War was not a bullet, it was breakfast. Number 16. Pickled beef. When fresh beef was available, it was given to soldiers either fresh or pickled. The pickled variety was preserved in brine so briny that it needed overnight soaking in a running stream before anyone could choke it down. Even after soaking, the meat was tough, gray, and it tasted the same whether cooked or raw. Most men ate it raw, because why bother? The quality was so poor that soldiers on both sides dreaded beef rations almost as much as they dreaded battle. A Virginia Tech historian noted that eating uncooked meat posed obvious dangers to health, and the meat rations of the Civil War literally defy belief. Pickled beef was supposed to be a step up from salt pork. It was not. It was salt pork's uglier, tougher cousin, and both of them belonged nowhere near a human mouth. Number 15. PEA bread. By 1863, the Confederate supply chain was collapsing. Wheat flour was gone. Cornmeal was running short. So quartermasters started issuing bread made from ground cowpeas, a type of field pea that could be dried, milled, and baked into dense, crumbling loaves. Pea bread was musty, bitter, and fell apart in your hands. The soldiers hated it. Union troops across the lines heard about it and shouted taunts at night, asking how long the pea bread would hold out and whether it was time to lower the Confederate colors. Some rebels shouted back that they had plenty of mules to fall back on. That was not entirely a joke. Number 14. Desiccated vegetable stew. Those compressed vegetable pucks earned the nickname desiccated vegetables for good reason, but some soldiers actually tried to make them work. They would crumble the cubes into boiling water, along with whatever scraps of meat or hardtack they had, attempting to create a stew. The vegetables expanded into a slimy, fibrous mass that tasted like dirt and smelled like a root cellar. One soldier described it as nothing more than bird food. The nickname stuck so completely that even official Army reports started using it. Desiccated vegetables became one of the most enduring pieces of Civil War slang, a testament to just how thoroughly the men rejected the government's attempt to keep them healthy. Number 13. Hardtack pudding. Second pattern break. Here is where soldiers got creative. Out of pure desperation, some men invented hardtack pudding. They placed hardtack into a canvas bag and beat it with a club against a log until it was reduced to fine powder. Then they mixed in a little wheat flour, raisins or dried fruit if they had any, and enough water to form a dough. This was boiled or steamed in a cloth until it set into something resembling a dense, heavy cake. One soldier called it the great triumph of the culinary art in camp. It required effort, planning, and ingredients most men did not have. But when it worked, it was the closest thing to dessert the Army could produce. A lump of pulverized cracker and dried apples boiled in a rag. That was celebration food. Number 12. Bully soup. Bully soup was a hot cereal made from crumbled hardtack and cornmeal, boiled in water, wine, and ginger when available. It was thicker than porridge, but thinner than stew, warm, and filling on cold nights in camp. The wine and ginger added enough flavor to mask the staleness of months-old crackers. Most soldiers never got the wine or the ginger, so their version was just hardtack and cornmeal in hot water, which tasted like wallpaper paste. But they ate it because it was warm, and warmth meant survival. Number 11. Acorn coffee. When the Union blockade cut off coffee imports to the South, Confederate soldiers grew desperate. They tried roasting and brewing everything they could find, including acorns. The acorns were parched, roasted in butter if they had any, and ground into a powder that was boiled in water. The result was bitter, tannic, and bore almost no resemblance to actual coffee. Soldiers also tried peanuts, sweet potatoes, corn kernels, dried apples, okra seeds, dandelion roots, and cotton seeds. The best substitute was chicory root, which at least produced a dark, aromatic brew that could fool you for half a second. Confederate troops traded tobacco across the lines for Union coffee whenever they could get away with it. Tobacco for coffee became one of the quiet, informal truces of the war, enemies trading luxuries in the dark between battles. Number 10. Mule meat. By 1863, the Confederate supply system was breaking down so badly that mule meat was issued as a standard ration, not as an emergency measure, not as a last resort, as regular food. Quartermasters distributed mule flesh to soldiers who accepted it because the alternative was nothing at all. One journalist working for the Vicksburg Whig reported that mule meat sold readily at $1 per pound, with citizens as eager to get it as they had once been to purchase seasonal delicacies. Some soldiers found the meat tender and nutritious. Others tasted it once and could not stomach a second bite. The Vicksburg Daily Citizen called mule flesh very palatable, though one has to wonder whether the editors had anything else left to compare it to. Number 9. Green corn and raw apples. During the Maryland campaign, entire Confederate divisions subsisted on nothing but green corn and apples picked from the fields they marched through. No salt, no cooking, just unripe corn torn from the stalk and sour apples grabbed off roadside trees, eaten on the move. Green corn caused savage stomach cramps. Raw apples caused diarrhea that could lay a man flat for days. But starving soldiers did not have the luxury of waiting for ripe fruit or proper rations. They ate what the land offered and kept marching. Foraging was technically organized by officers, but in practice, hungry men grabbed whatever they could reach. Chickens, pigs, sweet potatoes pulled from garden rows, eggs taken from hen houses. The polite term was living off the land. The honest term was stealing from civilians who had little enough to spare. Number 8. Rice and molasses. When even mule meat ran out, Confederate quartermasters issued rice mixed with molasses as a meat substitute. The combination was supposed to provide enough calories to keep soldiers on their feet. It was sweet, sticky, and utterly unsatisfying as a replacement for actual protein. The Confederacy's Commissary General recommended the substitute as early as 1861, calling it an occasional measure. By 1863, occasional had become quite often. Sometimes cornmeal was added to stretch the mixture further. Men ate it because hunger is the only seasoning that never fails. And by the third year of the war, Confederate soldiers had become experts at eating things that no sane person would call food. Third pattern break. Let us talk about what these men did not have. No refrigeration, no canned goods worth mentioning. no understanding of bacteria or food safety. Mess pans were used for cooking, eating, and washing. Water came from whatever stream or ditch was nearest, often the same source used upstream by horses and latrine ditches. A Union soldier wrote that they would grab their plates and cups, settle down in groups, and the meal was soon over. They saved a piece of bread for last, wiped up everything with it, and then ate the dish rag. That was not a metaphor. They used bread as a cleaning tool and then ate it. Number 7. Johnny cakes. The Confederate soldiers' answer to fast food was the Johnny cake, a fried cornmeal flatbread cooked in bacon drippings. Mix cornmeal with water, a pinch of salt, and maybe sugar if you had any. Pour the batter into a hot greased skillet. Cook until the bottom was browned. Flip it once and eat it straight from the pan. Johnny cakes were portable, quick, and could be made with the two ingredients Confederate soldiers almost always had: cornmeal and grease. Some men cooked 4 days' worth before a march, stacking the cakes in their haversacks. By the second day they were hard. By the fourth they were green with mold, but they were food, and food was food. Number 6. Hellfired stew. A heartier, more aggressive version of skilly-gally, Hellfired stew was a camp invention that combined hardtack, salt pork, and whatever else soldiers could scrounge, boiled together into a thick, searing, hot mess. The name came from the liberal use of pepper and the fact that it was served boiling, the idea being that heat and spice could mask the taste of ingredients that had seen better days. It was a sophisticated dish by Civil War standards, showing an actual understanding of seasoning and texture. Hell-fired stew was proof that even in the worst conditions, men tried to make food that tasted like something more than despair. Number 5. Goober peas. As the Union blockade tightened and rations dwindled, peanuts became one of the last reliable food sources in the South. Confederate soldiers called them goober peas and ate them raw, boiled, or roasted over campfires. The peanut was not a common food before the war. It became one specifically because of the war, a survival crop that thrived in southern soil when everything else was being burned, seized, or blockaded. Soldiers made peanut soup, peanut coffee, and simply cracked and ate them by the handful around the fire. There was even a marching song about them. Peas, 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 eating goober peas. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas. It was the cheerful anthem of men who had nothing else left to eat and decided to sing about it instead of cry. Number 4. Confiscated enemy rations. Here is one of the strange truths of the Civil War. Confederate soldiers often preferred captured Union hardtack to their own cornbread. The cornbread was so coarse, dry, and tasteless that even rock-hard Yankee crackers seemed like a step up. When rebels overran a Union camp or supply wagon, the first thing they grabbed was food, not weapons, not ammunition, food. The ferocity of Confederate charges became a dark joke among Northern troops who claimed the rebels fought so hard because they were desperate to get their hands on Yankee haversacks. When Lee surrendered at Appomattox in April 1865, he told Grant that his men had been without food for 2 days, some for longer. Grant immediately sent enough rations to feed the entire surrendering army. The war ended, in part, because one side simply could not feed itself anymore. Number 3. Rats at Vicksburg. During the 47-day siege of Vicksburg in the summer of 1863, food inside the city ran out completely. Beef was gone, pork was gone, mule meat had been eaten, and so soldiers and civilians turned to rats. Dressed rats hung in the public market alongside mule meat because there was nothing else. A Confederate major reported that soldiers ate them with the relish of epicures dining on the finest delicacies. A Vicksburg resident wrote in her diary that when properly fried, they tasted like squirrel. Rats sold for $2.50 apiece, roughly 2 weeks' pay for a Confederate private. By the end of the siege, even rats were in short supply. People ate tree bark. They drank water from contaminated ponds. The newspaper, having run out of newsprint, published its final editions on strips of wallpaper. When Pemberton surrendered on July 4th, Union soldiers were shocked at the condition of the men who staggered out. They handed their rations to the enemy without being asked. Number 2. Muskrat and stray dog. Hunger did not just drive men to eat rats. A South Carolina soldier admitted in 1864 that he had devoured the hindquarters of a muskrat with vindictive relish and looked with longing eyes upon the adjutant general's young dog. He was not joking. Reports from both armies describe soldiers eating squirrels, frogs, turtles, snakes, and any animal slow enough to be caught. During the siege of Vicksburg, residents noted the sudden disappearance of dogs and cats from the streets. The Vicksburg Daily Citizen reported that they had not yet learned of anyone experimenting with the canine species. But the phrasing tells you everything. Not yet. The word yet did a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Number 1. Nothing at all. The most brutal meal of the Civil War was the one that never came. On countless marches, in frozen winter camps, during sieges and retreats, soldiers went days without eating anything. An Illinois soldier declared that hunger was the thing dreaded more than balls from enemy guns. A Confederate stated that the one thing they suffered from most was lack of food, and that they were always hungry. At Chattanooga in late 1863, Union troops on short rations were so desperate that one man skinned, fried, and attempted to eat a rat before losing his nerve when he remembered how the tail had felt slipping through his fingers. He could not bring himself to take a bite. He went to bed hungry instead. At Appomattox, Lee's army had received no rations at all on July 3rd. Men had been marching and fighting on empty stomachs for days. Hunger broke the Confederacy as surely as any battle. You can fight through fear. You can fight through pain, but you cannot fight through starvation. The body simply stops. Here is what stays with me. These were not professional survivalists. They were farmers, clerks, school teachers, and factory workers, most of them under 25, many of them teenagers. They had never cooked a meal, never gone truly hungry, and never imagined eating a rat, drinking corn coffee, or choking down a cracker full of worms. And they did it anyway for years. The next time you open your refrigerator and say there is nothing to eat, remember that a 19-year-old kid from Pennsylvania once beat a cracker with a rock, fried it in pig grease, and called it supper. He did not complain. He wrote a letter home, asked his mother to send pickles, and went back to war.